Oh,
Oh,
Charleston. Awesome.
all right, yeah. So I'm like, I think I'm recording now. Yes,
Yeah.
I am recording. Well, thanks so much to everyone for being here. So we have like Dr. Betty Lay. Um, she's an associate professor in the School of Education and Human Development at Boston College. And she's also the author of the Grant Writing Guide, which is like with Princeton University Press. And I actually met Betty when I first arrived to Texas A&M because there was like the Hazard Reduction and Recovery Center had a talk for her because she also studies like hazards. And I know that some of you also are interested in that topic. That's why I mentioned that. And then I invited her to come to the Planners of Color interest group to do a talk to us. And it was like really awesome. So I thought, how about like then introduce her Betty to the larger Association of Collegiate Schools of Planning, or ACSP, to give a talk about what it's like. Again, like Betty is like distilling everything in the book, or like some of the highlights in just like in less than an hour, right? So about 40 minutes and then some Q&A. But I will put also like in the chat more information about her book. And I think that you can also sign up for her newsletter. She has like awesome newsletters that keep me motivated to with like some nuggets about what I should be thinking about for where to get funding. Or I think that the other day was about like postdocs, right? Where do people can
Hmm.
get like postdocs? Because she does like interviews with like lots of people. She's a very big on professional development. So I want you to stay connected with with her. So maybe we'll put some information there in the chat. Thank you so much, Betty.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Garcia. And I'm so excited to spend time with you guys today. As Evie said, I will absolutely leave time for questions. So let me go ahead and share my slides so you can see what we are up to today. Today, I'm going to talk about 7 grant writing myths. So I really want to focus on the mindset shifts that you need to make to be a successful grant writer. And this is not to say that if you haven't done some of these things that you won't find success. But what I hope to do here is that professional development piece. How can we help you know where to focus your energy and time to increase your chances of success? So I have 7 tips I want to give you today. And as I mentioned earlier, please do drop your questions in the chat. I would love to hear them and love to answer them. And if I don't get to it today, I can absolutely follow up in a newsletter or something like that. So let's go ahead and dive in. Would love to start here though. Where are you in your grant writing journey? Are you new to grant writing? A, B, submitted before, or C, someone who has secured funding? And I know sometimes people feel a little nervous, like, oh, I don't want people to think badly of me if I'm newer to this. Well, I will say we have all been new to this at some point, and the fact that you are here, you are growing your skills, you will get better. So, where are you in your grant writing journey? Are you A, B, or C? And let's see what folks are saying. So we have a real mix of folks, the whole spectrum. So that is awesome. So if you are someone who is at an A today, hopefully we are saving you some time. And for those who are BCs, like Bogdan, for instance, you're on the BC range. Hopefully we're reminding you today of things you know, but might want to double down on in the future. All right, so let's dive in. Our goal, as a reminder, is to help you write more fundable grants and avoid 7 common pitfalls. So let's start with number 7. A lot of people get this sense that grants don't matter. And I say that because I definitely have been one of those people, but we know that grants do matter even in this time of funding being decimated, many times unlawfully. when we look at the data, we can know this for sure. So, for instance, Rice and colleagues looked at 92 randomly selected institutions worldwide, and they looked at their criteria for promotion and tenure. 67% of those institutions listed grant writing as part of the criteria for promotion. We also know that, okay, so maybe you aren't in a tenured or tenure track position. Do grants still matter? Well, Hayes and colleagues, they surveyed 4,700 researchers around the world, and 36% of those researchers said that grant writing was a critical factor in their career development. So it's not everybody, but many people cited grant writing as a key factor that helped shape their career. And then finally, grants do get attention. So I've interviewed a lot of people about their grant writing practices. And as one person told me, she's not from a grant writing field, so she really never focused on grants. But what she noticed was that when she got a grant, people really paid attention. And actually, some of you may know her, Michelle Mayer, obviously a huge researcher now, has gotten so many amazing grants. But she said when she got started, she's not really in a field that requires grants, but grants really helped her get a lot of attention for her work. It made people turn to her as an expert. So it can be a factor that really helps shape your career. Now, I had heard all of these things. I had an advisor that told me, you should really focus on grant writing. And I'll tell you the truth, I never did. I never spent any amount of time on grant writing. I really thought it was baloney. But I know now I had a lot of limiting beliefs around this. So Evis and I, at the start of this call, we were talking about the writing workshop you all did, where you talked about the thoughts that are influencing your writing. And for me, I had a lot of thoughts that were influencing this behavior of not focusing on grants. For instance, I really thought grants were a waste of time. That why would I spend time writing grants when they weren't likely to get funded? I should spend that time on papers instead, because I knew how to get those published. I knew a way forward. So I didn't want to spend that time on grants because I felt like I would have nothing to show for it. Also felt like I didn't need the money because I'm a social scientist. We know how to run studies on pennies. So I didn't see why I needed any money to run a study that I could run on fumes. But I also deep down believed that nobody would fund me. I really believed I was not a big enough name, hadn't published enough papers, wasn't at a big enough institution, and so on and so forth. I had all these thoughts that were holding me back. And I actually was able to get through all of graduate school and all of postdoc without learning how to write grants. All I cared about was doing my research and getting to teach and getting an office with a window. So that's why I show this picture. It's the picture I took on my first day as an assistant professor. I had thrown my bag down. You can see my bag here. It's a dark picture because it was 2013, so it's quite a long time ago, and pictures weren't as good, but I've thrown my bag down here, and I took a picture out the window because I was so excited. To me, this picture meant I had made it. I had my dream job. I was going to do research, teach, and have a window. But 2 weeks into that job, I had a meeting with an administrator who said if I wanted to get promoted, I had to get a federal grant. So I was very scared at that point because I had no idea, first of all, what a federal grant was. I didn't know what that terminology meant. So I also felt a lot of shame because it seemed like I should already know how to do all these things. And I felt overwhelmed. I had no idea where to turn to or how to get help. And I spent about 3 years that way. I didn't submit a grant for 3 years, even though I knew 2 weeks into that job that if I didn't figure out grant writing, I was going to lose the job. But eventually I found mentors and figured out where to focus. And the first grant that I submitted ended up bringing in over $350,000. It was a National Science Foundation grant. So I was able to learn the skills. I know you can learn the skills. And I also know that the skills of grant writing are transferable because I use those exact same grant writing skills to get funding from NIH, the National Academies. In the last couple of years, we've been funded by NSF, Broadman Family Foundation, WT Grant, SSHRC in Canada, CIHR, and so forth. These are universal skills, grant writing. It's really about learning where do you focus your energy. I believe so much in the power of these skills that I wrote a book on grant writing because it transformed my career. It really gave me a lot of control and power and the ability to choose what I want to do. I get to choose which studies I focus on. I get to support incredible trainees. And when I got that first grant, I literally called my mentor and I said, this, you know what this grant means? This grant is tenure. It was so clear to me in that moment. That was the power of grant writing. But I want to give you a few more examples because I do think grants really matter, but they might matter in surprising ways that you've not thought of. So here are just a few examples from some of the people I've interviewed. And in case it's not clear why I interviewed so many people, for the book that you see behind me, I interviewed 100 people about their grant writing practices. So I interviewed everyone from early career researchers to very seasoned professional grant writers to program officers and so on to understand what is it about grant writing as a genre that is different from other kinds of academic writing. So here are some of the examples of things that people told me grant writing let them do. One person talked to me, this one is about home. Grant writing finally allowed them to be in the location they wanted to be. Throughout all of their training, they always had to move to mentors' locations or study locations or wherever other people could support them. But once they got their grant, they got to choose where they wanted to be, and they had much more freedom in that. Another person, this one, told me that grant writing actually allowed them to date. And I thought that was such a funny and unusual response. And being a psychologist, I said, okay, please tell me more. And what he said was once he got his first grant, all of the worries that he had had on the table about how he was going to pay for health insurance, how he was going to cover his rent, those got taken off the table because instead of having to pick up extra classes to cover his expenses, he suddenly had that time covered and didn't have to do all these extra things. And so all of a sudden, he had time to date. This last icon is about the idea that over and over, one of the things that I heard across my interviews was that grant writing is the tool that lets people stay at the forefront of their field to really pursue exciting ideas that they hadn't gotten to pursue before. So would love to ask you all, if you could drop it in the chat, what could a grant do for your career? Why are you here today spending your precious time on a Friday at the end of a semester learning about grants? Let's see what folks are saying. Oh, thanks, Evies, for dropping the book in. What could a grant do for your career? Yeah, having a consistent research program, absolutely, Bogdan, focused on, yeah, being able to build out that program, promotion, supporting PhD students, mentoring people, absolutely, Evies. Building out your research lab, Danielle, and supporting student research positions. Yes, I think that's one of the most exciting things that grants can do. And when you look at the data on how funds are spent, a lot of it is supporting students, which is so exciting. Yojung, proceeding research and hiring students. Yeah, absolutely. Being able to do research, less stress on funding, working with community partners and paying them. Absolutely. These are all huge things that grant writing can allow you to do. So I urge you to, and I know you're already convinced, but I urge you to really consider grant writing as a tool to help shape your career. So that was our first myth that we busted. The next myth is this idea that funders are looking for great ideas. The truth is, funders are not looking for great ideas. That's not their goal. Funders are looking for great ideas that further their mission. To be successful in grant writing, you absolutely have to pay attention to funders' mission, because if you get a mismatch there, it's unlikely that you'll be funded. And that means it's a poor use of your time, because when you don't have a good match, you are going to run into a few problems. Here's two of them. You're going to either develop ideas you don't care about. So let's say that you've identified a funder and you're pushed towards that funder, but if it doesn't match your work, you can go in directions you don't care about. I'll give you an example. So I interviewed somebody who was in an awesome postdoc training program, and they trained everybody to write RO3 grants. But what she told me, R03 grants are a type of grant for the NIH and National Institutes of Health. And she said, R3 grants are mostly about secondary data analysis. And she said she just didn't care about secondary data analysis. So she spent about 3 months trying to develop a secondary data analysis grant. And at the end, she gave up. She said, I just don't want to do this work. So she scrapped that idea. She ended up writing work that she did care about, which was clinical intervention. And she actually got funded. She got an R01 level grant, which is actually a much bigger grant, and she was able to move to a position at NYU with that grant. So by listening to what it was she wanted to do and how it could best fit a funder, she was able to move her work in direction she cared about. A second example of why you have to pay attention to funder mission is if you don't, you're unlikely to be funded. I'll give you an example from my work. So I wrote an NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, public scholarship grant because I am working on a book on public scholarship, and I was like, oh, perfect, it's the greatest fit. And I got my reviews back from the reviewers. There were 3 reviewers. The first 2 said it was the best grant since sliced bread. They loved it. The third reviewer said, actually, when you read the fine print for this grant is supposed to support books that are for the public, and this book is actually for other scholars. The program officer agreed, and my work was not funded. So I really wasted a lot of my time by forgetting to pay attention to fit. So how do you figure out fit? Here's an exercise you can do. Try something called finding your usual suspects. So this is especially important for all of us now when funders are being decimated. How do you diversify your grant portfolio? Well, you pay attention to the funders who might like you. So the way you can do that is you could search up the chain. So who's funding other people that you are looking up to? So people who are 3 years ahead, 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead. Who is funding them? Write down those funders on a spreadsheet and keep tabs on them. What kinds of ideas do they want to fund? Because you like that person's work, the funder likes their work. So it's not too far of a tip to get the funder to also like you because you see yourselves as being within a similar vein. You can also search in-house who is funding people at your location. So for instance, Towson, right? Sema, you're at Towson. So who at Towson is getting funded? Who are their funders? And researching those funders. Those are good targets for you because those funders have already been convinced that Towson's a great place to be. They don't have to be convinced of that anymore. They agree. So starting with those funders can help. Look within. So what are the professional associations you're part of? I know you guys are part of this organization. What else are you part of? Do they have small grants that you can apply to? And look at those options. And then also talk to your research administration office. So ask them, well, who would they recommend for you? Can they sit with you and talk through ideas for possible funders? So having lots of rich targets for your work can be very helpful. I'll give you an example of this. I wrote a grant for the National Institutes of Health. It got a great score. It was a fundable score, but it didn't get funded the first round. So I resubmitted. It actually got a worse score the second time around, which is, of course, very deflating. But I said, okay, well, this second time around, the reviewers want me to really change the work itself, and I don't want to do that. So I asked myself, well, who's on my usual suspects list? Who else can I apply to? And I'd been keeping tabs on multiple funders, and I went down my list. Okay, this organization is interested in grants on climate change and health, which is what my grant was about. That next one, they didn't fund it, but then I went to the Grodman Family Foundation because I had seen them as a possible target for me. They funded the work. So having these options for yourself can help diversify your grant portfolio. Okay, that was number 6. We're on to myth number 5 that we're going to bust. Sometimes people have this idea that a good idea doesn't take work, but that's not true in grant writing. Good ideas take a lot of work. You can see that by looking at samples. So if you don't have access to funded samples, I do link out a bunch of funded samples here. They're on my website, scholarfoundations.com/samples. So openly available grants. You can search what's been funded that people have posted online there. So you can get a sense of the richness of ideas and how people make a convincing case for their work. But in addition to that, most grants take a lot of work to develop a great idea. They don't fall out of the sky. So a lot of times when people are newer to grant writing, sort of the people on the A side of the ABCs we were looking at, when you're on the A side, one problem people run into is they'll say, I came up with this idea, but then I saw someone else got funded for it. There's nothing new under the sun. I really hear that complaint a lot, that I can't come up with a totally brand new idea that no one else has thought of. But my response to that, and I'm sure Evis will agree, is if you are coming up with good ideas that other people are getting funded for, that is a great sign. You have fundable ideas. We just need to get you to get them out into the world so that reviewers and funders can hear them. So don't get disheartened if you see other people are getting funded for work you're excited about, because it means you're on the right track. You're developing ideas that people see as fundable. But the second part of this is often ideas take work. So you might have one idea, but it's usually the combination of an idea with other things that makes for a great idea. So I give an example. I have a colleague who studies Safe Care. Safe Care is a child abuse prevention program. But as she said to me, a grant on Safe Care is not interesting because we already know that Safe Care works. But what she did is she combined a study of Safe Care with a study of looking at fathers as parents. So having those two pieces together is what was exciting, because usually a lot of parenting interventions are targeted to mothers. For any of you who are parents in the room, you've probably experienced this, but so what she did is combining that Safe Care plus fathers. That was a winning idea, and it did get funded. So I hope you take that as encouragement, that as you are working on an idea, are there edges or pieces of this that you can combine with other things to up the excitement around the work or the stakes? All right, flying right along, and I will take questions for sure, so don't hesitate to drop them in the chat because I'll scroll back. But myth number 4, any feedback is helpful. This is a myth because it's not true for grant writing. So a lot of times people don't realize that you have to get specific type of feedback to be helped out with grant writing. So they'll get something that I call not critical feedback. You know, the type of feedback you get from friends and colleagues where they say, oh my gosh, you're the best thing since sliced bread. I absolutely love your idea. No changes, mic drop. That is so nice. And you should love your friends, keep them close to your heart. You need people like that in your life, but they have wasted your time in terms of grant writing. In grant writing, you need critical people because your reviewers are critical. So you need to find people that will give you the feedback that says, this is not important sounding, seems like only a really small step forward, your approach has issues, that kind of feedback. And the joke in grant writing is that you want feedback from the type of people who will tell you to your face that you have an ugly baby. So very harsh, but it is the truth, because when you think about how the grant process works, our B's and C's in the room, you know this, that there are many people involved in grant writing. It's you, your institution, program officers, and reviewers. The fact that your work has to resonate with reviewers and program officers, so much so that they advocate for your work at the funder, that's what makes grant writing one of the most social types of writing that we do as scholars. Because when you write a paper, it doesn't matter if the reviewer is like thrilled about your work, because far more papers get accepted than the odds in grant writing. Across funders, before all of the changes we've been experiencing, across funders, only about 10 to 20% of grants get funded. So you really have to stand out so much in the pool that everybody is advocating for you. And to get that kind of excitement, you need to weed out all the issues with your grant. As one person joked with me, they said, by the end of the first page of your grant, your reviewer should be weeping. They should be saying to everyone in the room, if you don't fund this, I'm going to fund it myself. So that kind of excitement matters in grant writing, and that's why you need really critical people to review your grant. All right, we are already at number 3 for our tips. Myth number 3, your job is to explain what you're going to do in your grant. That is not the point of how you need to start your grant. So this is where newer grant writers go wrong. They focus on what you're going to do, when in truth, you have to start with why you're doing the work. That's how you get people motivated and excited and wanting to advocate for your work. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let's say I tell you, I need $20,000 to blow up this rock. Your first reaction to me is going to be, why? So I have to start with why first to get you on board. And see how different it looks if I start with that why. So if I say to you instead, there's a rock up here on top of a hill and it's about to fall. When it falls, it's going to destroy the grain silo for this whole community. It's going to take us $20 million and 20 years to recover when this boulder falls. So we need to destroy it before that happens. All of a sudden, you may not agree with me, but you're much more on board if you can understand why I want to do the work. So you have to start with why. I'll give you an academic example because I think sometimes it helps to have more examples of this. This was my first grant that I mentioned. My first grant, I started with this, and I thought I had done a fantastic job. I'm going to model risk and resilient academic trajectories for a city directly impacted by a significant natural disaster. I was so proud of this. I was really patting myself on the back. I met with my program officer and I said, look at this. So good, right? He was like, what? What are you trying to do and why? He wanted me to answer why. So after a lot of work, I came to schools are an epicenter of recovery after disasters. If we can help schools recover, we help communities recover. That was much more convincing, and as you saw, it did get funded. I had to start with that why for the work. All right, on to number 2. Reviewers have time to review your work in depth. A lot of people come into grant writing believing this because you worked so hard on your grant. As Evie's mentioned, you could spend months on your grant. So you hope that the reviewers are savoring every word like fine wine, but that's not what's happening. Reviewing is service work. When we review, we are doing it as a service. We are doing it despite all of our other job demands, and it's outside of our regular work. So for instance, I just moved back from Australia. I was on sabbatical and I got about 400 pages to review right before I was moving. So I was trying to do this at night and pack up and do all the things while also reviewing a grant. And I'm happy to do it. I think it's really important that we fund great ideas, but it's service. It's not something I had plenty of time, extra time to be doing. So the thing to know about reviewers is because we are under pressure, because we are doing this on the side as service, we are reading your grant looking for review criteria information. We are reading to understand how you meet the criteria that the grant funder gave us to think about. So I'll give you an example. At the National Science Foundation, the review criteria they care about is what is the intellectual merit of the grant and what are its broader impacts. So that's how we're reading the work. You need to know what the review criteria are for your grant so that you can write to that and help reviewers make a case for you for your intellectual merit, for your broader impacts. You should be speaking to exactly that and study those review criteria. Study how you're going to be evaluated because you do better when you know what's on the test. All right, and we are finally to the most important myth that really stops people in their tracks. And I think this is if you take nothing else away from today, this is the one to pay attention to. It's the idea that you're not ready. When really the most important factor for getting support, any idea, anyone want to guess what that is? Give you a second to think. What do you think the most important factor is for getting your work funded? Danielle, ding, just try. Biden, absolutely, you guys got it. You have to submit. If you don't submit, you will not get funded. I never got a grant as a graduate student, as a postdoc, but I could never have expected to. I never submitted. So, of course, I didn't get a grant. If you don't submit, you will not get funded. And the other important piece of this is usually you need to resubmit. Most grants don't get funded on the first try, they get funded on resubmission. And I want to make sure everybody knows that because, for instance, I talked to somebody, she'd actually been a finalist for a Spencer postdoc grant. And she told me, ugh, I got rejected. I was just a finalist. And so she scrapped the grant. She never turned back to it. And I was just horrified hearing this because actually being a finalist for a Spencer postdoc is a mark of distinction. It means the reviewers think you're ready. You were right on the cusp, and you absolutely need to apply the next year because those are the people they are looking for that next year because they see you as having so much potential. They want to hear your work. You have to keep going. So I'm not saying persist in the face of all the worst challenges, and I know it's very hard to be a scholar right now, but I am saying that it's important that we all know this and tell each other this because the reason why we see a lot of differences in rates of funding for men and women is because everybody submits at the same rate, but men resubmit more. So we need to make sure everybody is resubmitting because that really increases your chances of getting your work funded. So that was all I have for my tips. I will plug that if you want some submission checklists, you can go to this website and download them. And if you do that, you'll also get the newsletter Evie was talking about. And I regularly share things like how do you fill out your report, your annual reports? Why are they important? I give you examples of those. I recently had a data management plan, things like that. So I try to make sure that the newsletter isn't too frequent, but also that it's really packed with helpful things and examples. Thank you all. I'll stop sharing now. And I'm ready for questions. Thank you, Danielle. What can I answer for you guys?
Yes, this was fantastic.
Oh,
I'm
thank you.
gonna also post the link here.
Oh,
Maybe
thank you.
sometimes easier to get.
Yes. And I switch between Windows and Mac, so it doesn't always work, to drop the link from one to the other, for
Yes.
sure. I'll scroll
Yeah,
back through too.
and you cover a lot in less than 40 minutes. So I'm grateful because again we have time for questions.
Yeah. Ashley, do you want to unmute and ask your question out loud? No pressure to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Betty,
Oh, there.
for such a nice presentation.
Oh,
So I was just wondering because we recently submitted a NASA grant for water quality, at the Sangamon River watershed. The grant was we spent about like 3 months, and I'm sorry, I actually didn't introduce myself. My name is Afshin Sadaf. I'm a postdoc at Geospatial Collaborative at University of Missouri St. Louis.
oh,
So we spent a lot of time like working on the grant. We have different people from different universities, and I think, in my opinion, that was the most prolific. Uh, there was so many people from different fields, and they were the expert. But finally, we didn't get funded. So I was just wondering if you have any experience with submitting to the NASA grant, particularly because you mentioned that you have been submitting to NSF more, and that grant was about $500,000. So do you have any suggestions for how to target the grant in terms of their amount they are funding? What is the likelihood of getting a bigger grant than the smaller amount?
yeah,
Yeah, I'm
great.
sorry.
No, no, keep going, Afshin.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's what I just wanted to ask your expert opinion on that. If you could provide any feedback. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so a couple things. First, I'm sorry you didn't get funded. I know how disappointing that is. So it is important, of course, to mourn when a grant that you've spent so much time on doesn't get funded. But a couple things. So I have not submitted for NASA myself, but whenever a grant gets rejected, if you're able to get feedback, that is always so helpful. Not every funder gives you feedback, but trying to get feedback, and if a program officer will speak with you, also following up to get that kind of feedback because they see what's happening in the review room and can give you insights on that. So those are sort of first steps to take. Then in terms of targeting a funder, uh, trying to talk to people who have been funded because you're hitting exactly on it, Afshin, that all of grant writing, no matter what funder you are targeting, is cultural capital. That you are trying to learn what things are like at that funder, how reviewers think, how the funders think. So, talking to lots of people is part of the work of grant writing to build that cultural knowledge around, well, what is NASA looking for? How do we think about budgets? Because for instance, at some places, they want to see a bigger budget, but other places will want to see a smaller budget, and reviewers will also have a sense, even though often we're told not to look directly at budgets, reviewers have a sense of what they think things should cost. So I'll give you an example. In that first grant that I wrote, I thought it was a $10,000 grant. And as you saw, it got about over $350,000. But it was really important that I talked to mentors along the way because I talked to a mentor about my budget and she said, "Are you nuts? This is not a $10,000 grant. This is absolutely over 300,000." And she said if I had asked for 10,000, the reviewers would have decided I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't talked to enough people to get a sense for how much this should cost and the feasibility and so on. So all of that to say, yeah, talking to more people, getting that sense. If you haven't, from your collaborators, if they didn't have samples of funded grants, trying to reach out and collect samples of funded grants can be really helpful in understanding, well, what does a funded grant for this agency or the funder look like? That can be really important. And then the other thing to think about is that early in my career, I really thought, well, it's such a waste of time if a grant doesn't get funded. But there are so many things that can happen from a grant that isn't funded that are important to keep in mind. So first of all, absolutely put it on your CV. I always list my unfunded grants. You can see my very long list online if you look. Always list it because you can use that in your promotion materials, in your job application. So if you are a postdoc, then when you're applying to jobs and you're able to say, here's what I've been trying to do, everybody recognizes that that is a skill that you are developing. And it's a great sign when you are submitting because it shows that you are developing these skills, getting feedback, you are trying out your writing and getting support for ideas. So that's a really good thing that you're doing. And also, when grants aren't funded, are there other funders? Should you be resubmitting to that funder, or are there other funders that might be interested in the work? And I also think a lot too about, are there pieces of this that could be peeled off into a concept paper, for instance? So I believe no grant is wasted work. I didn't always believe that, but that's where I'm at now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Betty. It was very helpful, and we have been actually discussing about resubmitting the grants to others. We just need to search to get it aligned to, as you just mentioned, that it should be a better fit, rather than just randomly submitting to any of the grant.
Yeah, absolutely. And just hopefully to give you some hope, I interviewed somebody. He had an idea for a grant. It involved social behavioral health centers within the military, and he submitted it multiple times to one agency, but because it didn't get funded, but he kept talking to people, and eventually he talked to somebody who was a program officer who said, oh, that sounds like a good fit for what we're looking for. It ended up getting funded by the Department of Defense. So it just took more conversations to figure out, well, where is that right fit? Who are the people who want to support this work? So I hope that gives you some hope.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, Bogdan, would you like to unmute and ask your questions?
Sure, why not? I'm just curious whether the tips and strategies that you mentioned, which were amazing, thank you so much for doing that for us, whether you approach or used to approach them from a different angle, targeting grants that are like stage specific, particularly like early career researcher, things like that. Some foundations have stuff like that. And also whether you approach stuff differently when you're submitting state, federal, agency specific grants or foundations? Thank you.
Yes, great question. So I love this, and I will do you one better because I won't answer with my opinion, but I'll answer with the opinions of many people that I asked this question of. So I talked to a lot of people about this, and the general consensus was if you're earlier in your career, so for example, grad student, postdoc, apply to anything and everything because any single thing is helpful. So the $200 seed grant you get from POSEG will absolutely be a great marker that you can use and cite as evidence in your grant when you're applying to bigger funders. And even if you're early in career, like if you are, in your first 1 to 3 years as an assistant professor, any of those early wins, they're great social proof, right? So if you can get an internal grant or a grant from your society or even an award, these are all pieces of evidence that you can use in your bigger grants to say, look, all of these people believe in my potential and you should too. So that can also be very helpful, by the way, if you are trying to navigate and negotiate new positions and try to get a better salary. So I think that is one thing I would say about very early career. But once you are pre-tenure, you really have to lean on the people around you at your institution. So you have to talk to mentors in your department and within your school because the way that fields and departments view different types of grants varies vastly. So, I was in a school of public health before, and they only cared about federal grants. And for those of you who don't know the distinction between federal grants and other types of grants, which I didn't when I was getting started, federal grants are the grants funded in the US. It refers to grants funded by there are 26 government agencies. Those are federal grants. The reason why a lot of universities like them is they usually have high indirect costs attached. So indirect costs are a percentage of the direct costs of the grants. So let's say you have a grant that is going to cost $100,000 in direct costs. So the cost to pay for printing, participants, staff, it's 100,000 directs. At Boston College, the indirect costs for a lot of federal agencies is 56.5%. So that means that on top of that 100,000, Boston College will get an additional 56.5% or $56,500. And those indirect costs fund things like the library resources, all the things it takes to keep a big infrastructure running. So I'm giving a long-winded answer, but all this to say is a lot of universities care about those indirect costs because they're really important for supporting the infrastructure of the university. So at some institutions, they only care if you get a federal grant. And a foundation grant is a nice pat on the head, but nobody is using that for your promotion. That's at some institutions, but at my current institution, they love foundation grants. They believe that that is important for the field and good for visibility. So they don't have that distinction, but it's going to differ for every place. So this is another example of why it's so important to talk to lots of people. In terms of different strategies, to answer your second question, Bogdan, which is really great, you'll see that my bias is that a lot of the critical grant writing skills are universal in the sense that what makes you successful at one funder translates to success at other funders. And the key thing in terms of the strategy for whether you're writing to federal or foundation grants is, do you understand the mission? Have you spent time understanding what it is they seek and how you can fit that? Have you spent time trying to speak to program officers or people who've been funded or people who review for that funder? Because doing that helps you understand that culture and that fit, which ends up mattering. It's a little bit like a job interview or a college interview. If you go to a college and you're saying, I love books, well, it's much more effective if you come to some place like BC and you say, well, I'm really interested in the core books or things like that. So when you show that much more investment and that you've put in that time, that's how you start to stand out in that top 10 to 20%, which I know from earlier, Bogdan, that you've had these successes. So I know you're asking generally, but so yeah, I would say that a lot of those strategies don't differ. It is always helpful to get a sample when you can, just because you can understand that fit more closely.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Bogdan. What else can I answer for you guys?
Well, I can ask a question. And it is kind of like similar to the strategies for federal grants and foundations. But can you talk a little bit more just about the foundation part? Maybe people, are there like any like tips? Maybe it's like, you talk to, there's like, universities, like they have like partnerships at the local level, and that's like a way of like talking to people in different offices and learning about grants. Or is it like kind of like, I think that a lot of people are searching for similar grants as well, so is it like good tricks to try to combine requests at the local level? So I was just wondering, like, just in general, like, thinking about approaching foundations, like if you have any tips or tricks related to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So I have asked a lot of people these questions. So I'll share what people have done. And I would say that having talked to lots of people about their grant writing practices, what I have learned over time is that everybody does this differently and nothing is per se wrong, but it's more figuring out what works best for you. So I'll give you some examples. I have talked to folks who have gotten consistently funded by certain foundations, and part of how they did that is building relationships to those foundations. So going to conferences, and when those foundations give talks, making sure that you're in that room, you're asking a question and you're following up, exchanging a business card or a LinkedIn, to make sure that you are on their radar. One of the things that might not be clear is so much of this is sort of slow burn that hopefully you have a very long academic career. So these relationship connections may not seem to have much oomph early on, but they build over time. So for instance, there was somebody that I early in my career met. They were a program officer, but they ended up moving institute. They left the program officer position. They moved to another institution, and then invited me to be on a grant panel. And so that's a long-winded way of saying that these relationships are very winding and you kind of figure out information as you go on. So I'll give you another example. There was a program officer that I had been trying to reach for months, and I complained to my friend and colleague, and she said, well, why aren't you calling them? I said, calling them? Why would I call them? That's so weird. But it's that kind, she said, well, they only answer their phone. They don't answer email, which I don't agree with, but she knew that and I didn't. And I really had to talk to more people to understand, what is the best approach. And so every different funder will have quirks like that, like, oh, they really like people who blah. But as you talk to more people, you will figure out those things. So I guess I would encourage you that part of grant writing is this networking piece. So doing what you're doing right now, talking to more people, figuring out what it is they know, because those little tips can help you kind of have that little 1% bump that you need to get into that fundable pool. Does that answer your question, Yves? I kind of went off on my own tangent.
No, yeah, thank you. Yeah. I will say also with like funders, because like when you were talking, I was thinking, oh, there's like some organizations, they're more like DC organizations that do like policy work. So
Mhm.
you usually don't think about them as like funders per se, but through creating relationships, they definitely do like policy work. So I was thinking, yeah, like there's some things like right now I have like Unidos US. So they work with like Latinos and they're supporting some of my work in Puerto Rico. And it was just because I created a relationship and then they just say, hey, do you want us to support something that you're doing? So it's kind of random, but I guess that the key that I got is like a lot of it is in the relationships that you
Yeah.
try to build and then just showing your work and keep those relationships. And then sometimes things come out of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me, Afshin, when you were talking about your grant. So you spent all this time learning how different people work, and that is also really helpful information because you're figuring out, well, who might you want to collaborate with long term? And you're testing out those relationships because hopefully your grants are going to get funded soon. So you're going to be working with people a long time. And so paying attention too to who is it you want to keep working with, who has a similar style as you. So, for instance, when people are writing a grant, some people like to write at the last minute. That doesn't jibe with my style. I like to be finished far in advance. So, and neither is wrong. It's just kind of who you are as a scholar and how you like to do your work and paying attention to that too.
Well, maybe we have time for one more question, right? Like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
If anyone else.
If not, I guess I'll end with the one pager of your grant. What are some common mistakes that people make? So the one pager for any funder is usually that first pitch that you make in the grant. Most funders will ask you for give us a short overview or short pitch, or they'll say a one pager. At NIH, they call it the specific aims, or some places call it the significance section. In any case, they're referring to this idea of a one pager. What is the one page that we could share around to everybody so that we can get people on board to fund your grant? So some mistakes I see with the one pager are not focusing on whys. Of course, you have to explain what you'll do, but you have to start with why you'll do the work. But the other part is not spending enough time on the one pager, not realizing how important it is, because a lot of times the only page a program officer might read is that one pager or a reviewer. So for some agencies, for instance, the reviewers, they review a few of the grants, but when people are talking about the other grants, you're just reading the one pager. So it's how you get others on board, or if a program officer likes your grant, but they can't fund it, they can share it to somebody else, and they're going to share that one pager. So you really spend a lot of time on that one pager. And so I think that's it. I really appreciate you all joining us today. It was so nice to get to speak with you, and please keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, check out the newsletter to stay connected. And I found this very motivating. So now that for many of us, we have more time in the summer. So these are things that we can implement immediately to think about what are we going to which grants are we going to pursue and foundations we are going to talk to. The next talk is like theory as practice, so building a research framework that centers justice. And so it's about teaching, right? With Dr. Ananya Roy at UCLA. So that's next Friday at noon CST, and there's like a Zoom registration there. And then I will share also like this recording with others. So later on you can see how the meets, think about them more carefully, and get your plan together for this summer. Thank you so much, Betty, for all your insights. This was really, really, really good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.